Boys and girls, here with Immutable to discuss my problem with scientism.
Your problem with scientism, you hold the scientism. What the fuck
I
are
do.
you?
I do, but you think that's a problem, so I'm just saying that you're going to present a problem, right?
I mean, I just think the view is not really functional.
Let's figure out what your let's first of all build your straw man of the view.
I mean, scientism itself claims that all knowledge can be gained through scientific methodology.
Does it claim that all knowledge can be enhanced with scientific methodology?
I'm fairly certain it states that it can be obtained via scientific methodology.
That can be what?
Attained or obtained.
Okay, so all knowledge. Okay, so we could start with that. So basically, we've got all knowledge, right? That we're going to have about what? The world? About reality. So basically, we have knowledge about reality. And what other...
I mean, I think you can kind of divide knowledge about propositions, knowledge about, I guess you could call like personal knowledge, and for me, I would also characterize like moral knowledge, because I don't consider morals to be necessarily something that should be derived from natural facts.
Okay, how about walking?
Well, yeah, walking is a biological function, right?
It's okay, but would you derive that from natural facts?
Sure.
Is that how you learn to walk?
Well, no. I mean, I'm not sure if you want to call it like intuitive fact or kind of like a natural fact of the world. I'm not sure how you want to.
Like, I think it might fit into the how-to category of knowledge, but basically, so in fact, all of the knowledge when you were less than 3 years old, how do you say that? Why old? Yeah, 3 years old. Okay, smaller than 3 years old. None of your knowledge came from propositional facts, right? When you were less than 3 years old. I mean, were you able to make a proposition and decide whether it's true or false before you were 3 years old?
You have knowledge about propositions, though, right? You identify like a key from a non-key, right? Like,
how is that a proposition?
Well, I mean, it's a type of object, right? It's a type of abstract object, and there's a set of objects that are distinct.
Okay, so you have balls in your toolkit or your toy box, and you have blocks. Okay.
Yeah.
So you know that blocks and balls are different.
Right. You know somehow, right? Even if you can't necessarily formalize that statement, that there is a type of difference between the types of objects you're sifting through.
Right. But how is that propositional knowledge to a child, to a baby?
I mean, what does it matter if it's to a baby or if it's to like a 50-year-old man or to
well, because I think we have to make a distinction between the kinds of knowledge we're talking about. There's knowledge of walking, which is certainly not propositional knowledge, but you could later as an adult make all kinds of propositions about walking. Okay, I lift my right leg at the knee, bend it at the knee, I move it forward, I swing it forward, I step down, I bring my hips over, I mean, I could make all sorts of propositional knowledge, and I could describe walking. And then scientifically, we could break walking up further, and we could come up in principle with this set of knowledge about. So we know everything there is to know about walking, right? All scientific knowledge about walking, anatomy, what's firing in the brain, everything, all of that. Okay. So, okay, if I'm a scientist, Do you think that I would refer to these propositions when I walk, or do you think I just walk?
I think you just walk, but you'd be referring to a proposition.
Why would I have to?
I mean, when you're talking about science, right? Like when you're talking about this is how two chemicals react about something, right? You're describing a process. Like you're describing like some relation between two sets of objects, and that relation could be either true or false, right? That
That,
statement
that's
about
a
a
pretty
thing.
limited. That's a pretty limited proposition. I mean, proposition can be true or false. A block is not equal to a ball.
Well, sure, right? I
That
mean,
can be true or
uh,
false.
but sure. I mean, like one of the basic proposition, well, notions of a proposition is that it expresses a belief about something. So,
Well, a proposition is going to be something that basically maps to a characteristic function that is either true or false. So it's either one thing or another, right? So a
well,
proposition is pretty strict.
I mean, I guess that's true if you consider like only a Boolean like form of logic, right?
Well,
Where
uh,
things can only either be true or only ever be false.
yeah, you see, when you say proposition, I necessarily think of a very mathematical description of what a proposition is, and that is something that only maps to it. But when you say a statement, like okay, if a human makes a statement about something, like a block is not a ball, okay, um,
Yeah.
that would be you could say that's a proposition. We could turn it into a proposition and say it's true or false, but it says a whole lot more when you say a block is not a ball.
Well, when I say something like humans are attached and drawn to the cosmos or something like that, right? You can argue like that kind of statement is true or false, but it's much less obvious, or I would argue not very obvious at all, what's meant by true or false at that point.
Right. So it's not a proper proposition. So you really couldn't use it in a logic statement and come up with.
Well, it is a proposition, right? It's saying that there is like some property that A has for B, that humans are drawn to the universe. It could be that most people aren't, but some people are, right? But in what way do you mean? You know, how the semantics really play in regards to what it means for that thing to be true or false.
Yeah. Here's what I'm pushing back on. Uh, Calling things propositions, and using that logical term, I think tends to limit us to a real, very tight, small subset of statements that we make, things that can indeed be determined whether they're true or false. That would be a proposition. So,
Well, sure.
proposition is
I
a
mean,
string that will map.
well, sure.
So,
I mean, I think that's the case. I mean, I also think that the majority of things we talk about, like in terms of argumentation or in terms of like more generic propositions and arguments, we have to use logic in a way that it's more flexible to like recognizing form and fallacious reasoning or things like that.
eggs are really good. How does that map the true or false?
I mean, there that isn't a proposition, right? I mean, it's just saying
But it's a statement.
it's a statement about the world.
Oh, it's a statement about maybe me in the world.
Yeah, like, yeah.
Okay. So I guess what I'm saying is that, okay, so I subscribe to scientism, and the kind of scientism I subscribe to is that science can tell us everything that we need to know about the world and how the world works and how we work and how basically human beings work, how organisms work. It can tell us, in
I
principle, it can
don't.
tell us everything about that. But
I
now,
don't think it really. I think that's a very innocent claim at face value, but I think it really falls apart. Like when you say like when a scientific person says like something is true or false, right? That it's true that electrons that electrons are repel each other because of the the electric force that kind of forces them to, or that disfavors them coming close together because they're like charge. Well, it tells you about a state of the world. It says that some aspect is true, but science can't tell you what exactly that actually means, right? What it means that something is true, right? It only tells you that it is or is not true, or that some conclusion is or is not consistent with like with some set of data and analyses performed on that data.
Okay, let's consider this. That let's see, where's my other diagram for? Okay, consider that reality, basically the reality that we encounter in our daily lives. So all of this stuff like walking right here, and eggs are good. I like eggs. I like to taste eggs.
Mm-hmm.
My house is here on the hill, and I know the size of it, and I know what my house looks like, and all that stuff. All that stuff, sort of common sense knowledge. So that is what I typically call R1. Like, I know how to pick up my cup. I know how to make coffee. I know how to do a whole bunch of things. So there's a bunch of things that are kind of common sense knowledge. But now R1 is a little richer than that. So R1 involves a whole lot of knowledge of how to, and my body and my emotions. So this is basically body knowledge, right? It has nothing to do with verbalizing. And then on
Yeah.
top of that, there's a whole lot of stuff that I could verbalize, that I could put into statements. Like, I can tell you that I like eggs, that I live in a house on the hill. So I could make statements about that, but I couldn't make statements about how I walk. I could,
Right.
yeah. So that would be very difficult to make statements about how I walk. But let's see here if I can get another color. And God, is that what the hell color what am I after here? Damn. Okay. So anyway, so R1 is basically this big blob of knowledge, and I forget who it was. Susan Hack was talking in a lecture, and she quoted somebody as saying that science is the long arm of common sense. So if this is common sense right here, science is the long arm of common sense. So there's not really a good boundary between this common sense knowledge we have about the world. Like if you know how to make a table, you can also create a science of making tables, and you could use all sorts of trigonometry, and you could use physics
Yeah.
to determine the forces and all that, right? So there's no real boundary. So science is kind of like the long arm extension of that, right? Now the
Well, let's
interesting. Go
let's be
ahead.
careful though, right? Like science itself isn't like science, like physics, for instance. I can find the forces acting on an object using trigonometry and stuff like that. Very very basic math. But the science itself isn't the trigonometry, right? Like it's the application of the trigonometry to some problem, right? Like it's the application of a tool to solve some specific, type of thing that you want to learn about the world. Like how much does this chair move if I push it in a direction
Right.
or something like that, right? I think there's a difference between like what a hammer is and when I position a hammer to strike something or something like that. I think that's being like it's generalizing a little too much. Like what science itself is it's a way of testing the world. It's a way of saying, hey, I want to find out if X property about the world is correct or not correct. And what I'll do is I'll set up, statistical means that I can say if I can accept or reject, or if I can reject the null hypothesis. And once I have enough data to do so, well, good. Now I think I have a good theory. Now I think I have a good explanation of how something works.
Okay. So
But
if
then,
we're using a hammer,
yeah,
so we've got for one thing, we're in our body using a hammer. We know how to use a hammer, right?
yeah,
And we're not going to read a science book every time we hammer a nail, every time we swing, right?
no,
We're
you don't.
we're going to use that body knowledge. And we also know that we got to be a little bit careful because sometimes we hit our thumb. So we got to use a little common sense out here. And I could put that common sense into a statement, number one here, and say, be careful you don't hit your thumb immutable, or,
Yeah,
when you're hammering, keep your eye on the head of the nail. That'd be number two. I could write that little proposition. But now, if we went ahead and we analyzed, suppose we had a computer and we hooked up lights to every limb, and we analyzed carpenters and skilled technicians, and we come up with this whole huge set of scientific facts here about how you should use a hammer and what the best way to use a hammer is. So now we're writing science, right? So now we got the science of
well,
hammers.
let me raise a different example, right? Imagine me and you are walking like by a river, right? And you walk by the river and say, "Oh, that's a beautiful river. It's just flowing. It's that's beautiful." I can hear the birds chirping. I can see the squirrel. Some squirrels running around collecting acorns, stuff like that. And there's two ways to kind of understand the river, right? It's you can understand it by means of its environment and by means of what it's doing, but you can also understand it in a more scientific way. You can think about the fluid dynamics that are involved with each individual water molecule that are colliding with each other and interacting in this way to give rise to this fluid structure. But are those two descriptions equivalent, right? Like, is the common sense process that we're using to kind of assign that we're using like to assign knowledge about a river, like equivalent to the type of scientific knowledge, or this kind of like elementary process of particles crashing into each other, and you know the result of their overall interactions gives rise to a fluidic structure.
Yep. So okay, so right here we have our appreciation of the river and our walking along and enjoying the air and feeling the river and enjoying the flow of the river, listening to the rushing water, all of that. That's in our body, right?
Yeah,
And then we could be conversing and making all kinds of common sense statements about, yeah, I really love rushing water. Puts makes me really mellow, puts me to sleep. We say
right.
all kinds of things, right? But and you're saying that he used Bernoulli equations and figure out the flow of the river, and we could use we could think about geology. We could just write all these science facts. So we have this whole list of science facts, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but do you see that there's kind of a continuation here across that boundary that from this common sense stuff? So I'm saying science is the long arm of common sense. That it's where we look more deeply
Well,
into things.
so in that case, it kind of becomes a matter of what. I mean, I'm wanting there to be a boundary, right? I want to know, like the
What
question I should be asking
what
is
do you
that,
want a boundary?
well, because if there's two types of knowledge, but there's no boundary between where one goes and where the other begins, right? Then it doesn't seem sensible to refer to it as a true boundary. It doesn't seem to refer to there as being a segregation or some kind of like defining characteristic which defines common sense knowledge from scientific knowledge.
And that is the charge that people make against scientism, that they want to say, oh, this is real science, but all this other stuff is not. So you're the one with the boundary now. I'm not. Okay.
No, I
But,
mean, I
but that
just
is, do you understand that is a charge against scientism? That they want to make everything real science and pseudoscience, right? Real
I,
science and not science.
the thing is that we do know there is pseudoscience, and we know that there is real science. Like, we understand there to be a categorical distinction between what what traditional science does and the methodologies it employs to arrive at conclusions from that of pseudoscientific ideologies and methods.
Okay, so you want to write propositions, or you want to write science about how to do science, right? Is that what you're telling me? That you want this?
Well, what I'm saying is that I think there's certain rules that define science as being a valid form of acquiring knowledge about the world.
A valid form. Okay, is learning how to walk a valid form of finding knowledge about the world? Is learning how not to poke yourself in the eye, or how to build your blocks, is that a valid method of finding knowledge?
I would refer to those as kind of like innate knowledge or common knowledge.
Synthetic a priori. Basically innate knowledge, but you learn how to ride a bike, sometime when you're around 6 to 12 years old, right? So I mean, it's not exactly innate. These are skills that you're learning, and your body knows them, but you couldn't really write a book and tell somebody else how to do it and have them just get on a bike and start riding, right? There's something about your body that you learned, right?
So I think the process of describing that is actually more scientific than the writing itself.
Yeah, just because there's a continuum here doesn't mean that by the time you're out here writing these things, that there isn't a difference between writing this common sense stuff, right? Because we're going to be much more careful about writing these things than we are about these things. I mean, if you and I are going to determine how that river flows and why there are eddies in the river, and we're scientists, we're going to sit down for 20 years and we're going to figure that out. We're going to be a lot more careful. But I may say to you, oh, I really love the way the water swirls, right? And that, or look at that swirly thing in the water, or rivers have swirls, right? So that's common sense. There's still a continuum here. I don't see why you want this sharp boundary, but I do see why, if you go into a lab, or we decide on how to do science, I do see how we might write science rules about how we do science. I can understand that, and that's more science.
So it becomes one of these things about, if you lived in a world like where everything was of one category, nothing would be of that category, right? Because here's the thing: to say something is a category, to assign like some kind of characteristic, like the case of my laptop is blue, for instance. Inherently, when you say that type of thing, you're led to believe that there is something outside of blue, right? That there is this type of distinction between at least something which has a property blue, which we've not really defined, and something which is non-blue, right? And to say that like all things have a characteristic, and in this case, like all things fall under the purview of common knowledge, then that seems to be a really vacuous statement.
Okay, we have blue. Okay, we got blue things, so we got red things, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then we got purple things, and you understand that that's a gradient, but it's still just because it's a gradient doesn't mean there's no such thing as red or blue.
But you do understand that to say all things are of one category is to kind of eviscerate the meaning of the category itself.
I did say they were all of one category. Well, I said, yeah, we give it the category of knowledge, but that's not. We're talking about human knowledge. We're not talking about all things. We're not talking about the cosmos. We're talking about human knowledge. So I'm just saying that knowledge is a continuum between common sense and science.
Well, currently, yes, right. But your view, like the view of scientism, makes a much stronger claim than that. The view of scientism makes the claim that knowledge of all types, or that all knowledge itself, is in fact scientific.
Can I ask a quick question?
Who says that?
So Speed, how would you define knowledge?
How would I define knowledge?
Yes, how would you define knowledge? What is knowledge in your philosophy, in your philosophical framework?
It's a disposition in a human brain to do something based on it kind of involves a decision about what you would do in some future circumstance if several things were extant, right? So knowledge is basically a disposition in your brain. It's a form of neural wiring in your brain that would translate into some sort of action in the future. So we could define knowledge that way. Though I'm not being rigid about that. I'm poking at it, right? I'm poking at it saying, how could we define knowledge? So if I know how to ride a bike, okay, the knowledge about my body knowing how to ride a bike, I could get on a bike and actually ride the bike. I would know, my muscles would know which muscles to move, which joints to bend, whatever, to ride a bike. If I had knowledge of how a bike works, okay, I would be able to determine how the tire should, basically turn around.
Making a distinction between knowledge how and knowledge that?
I don't think.
Because that's what it sounds like. There's knowledge of how to ride a bike, and then there's knowledge about how the bike works. Knowledge how and knowledge that.
Yeah, there are, when you make that distinction, there's also gray areas between those two distinctions, knowledge how and knowledge.
Yes, of course, but the states, somewhat of a Venn diagram, there's still two categories there, knowledge how and knowledge that.
Yeah, but it's a gradient. It looks like that.
Yeah, so that's Venn diagrams represent that there's a gradient. But I would just define knowledge as justified true belief.
Yeah, that's the epistemology thing, but I think is
the best framework for understanding like what knowledge and belief is.
Yeah, JTB is something I think we can all pretty much agree on that sort of describes it. But
then I have another question to follow that one up with.
Justified true belief would not apply to your body's knowledge of how to ride a bike. So I'm saying that at some point, JTB also falsely represents it, like when Immutable was trying to tell me that everything's a proposition or knowledge is a proposition. I would push back on that because some things are gray areas. So JTB gets you into trouble. You get into gray areas.
So are you talking about like that your body knows how your heart beats? Something like along those lines when you talk about things that your body just knows how to do?
Yeah, it does. It does know how your heart beats.
Is it true that your heart is beating right now?
Is it what?
Is it true that your heart is beating right now?
I haven't checked in the last 5 minutes, so I can't guarantee it, but it seems like it probably is.
So your heart is beating. So it is true. Could you justify that it is true that your heart is beating?
Could I justify it?
I mean, obviously, you could put somebody's hand to your chest and they would feel your heart beating. So
yeah, I got a little pulse meter.
My final question: do you believe that your heart is beating?
Yes.
So then it's knowledge. See, knowledge, like your brain doesn't have a knowledge of how your heart to beat because knowledge implies more than just something like that. That there's more of an intention behind it. It's an intentional disposition generally on a proposition about whether it's true or false.
Yeah, that would be one way to make a Frankenstein monster out of knowledge, right? But I'm trying to work with Immutable to disavow ourselves of the Frankensteinian rigidity of classifying it as JTB or as propositions or whatever, or as just science. As it's either science or common sense. The two shall never meet. The accusation against scientists is that is what they do. They say, common sense is not knowledge.
So I have a question. Are you saying that you're essentially trying to define what knowledge is using science?
Yes.
Scientific methodologies?
Yeah, that's the cool thing about it. Here's the cool thing about it. Well, go ahead.
Well, I don't know how much that would work because I think that our current scientific methodologies generally only have a not very broad. I don't want to necessarily use the word narrow, but a not very broad swath of potentials to explain.
What just happened?
So I don't think that the scientific methodologies could be utilized to explain literally every single aspect of human experience and human existence.
See, that's where I would push back. So, okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
We are this thing right here, right? And we learn a bunch of stuff about the world. We learn this common sense, right? And then later on, we start to learn science. And, we learn all kinds of facts about the world. So facts about the world. So we have another kind of knowledge over here. And then when you learn science, what you can do, the first thing that you figure out, I think around maybe, I don't know how long for some people it takes forever, like Otangelo, but most of us know that we are an organism. And now that we know that we're an organism, we can come back around and we can define knowledge in another way with that scientific information. So now we can define knowledge in more way, or we can learn philosophy and we can make up words all fucking day and never get anywhere and define knowledge that way too, right? So we can define knowledge this way, or we can define it this way. I prefer the scientific way because I'm a hard naturalist, right? So I would look at knowledge as a disposition in your brain.
Well, I am too.
And not much more than that. And I wouldn't say that it's necessarily true belief. So I think you can have false knowledge.
I don't think that one can have false. I think knowledge.
Well,
I just don't think that's really the
what
way knowledge
do
is.
the JTB people call knowledge that's where people have a belief about something that's false?
That's just not knowledge. You have a belief.
Okay, so you call it a belief. Okay.
Yeah.
So
It wouldn't be knowledge.
Yeah,
Just,
so
just
what-
like if something was justified and true, but you didn't believe it, it's still not knowledge.
okay, so if the
In
human
that
has
particular framework.
the human
It's-
has a
it's
belief.
just in that particular framework, it's JTB.
Okay, so if the human has a belief and he's moving along the timeline here, and he comes right here, and it turns out that there's some decision he has to make about the world. He has a fork in his world path, right? So you can make a decision right here, and right about there, or say he realizes that he's at the fork in the road right here, right? So then he sort of like becomes conscious of this belief that he has about which path to take, left or right. Why does that have to be true? Why does it have to be true that I believe I should go left or right? What's true about that?
Well, it only becomes true once you actually do it.
Yeah.
So you could only say that it's true that you went left or right after you had already picked to go left or right.
So you're saying it doesn't.
You could be
become,
justified in going either direction. You could believe that you could go either direction. You could even have a second order belief that you believe that it's true that you could go in either direction, even though it's not actually true. But it isn't justified true belief that you went any way until you actually pick a way.
Okay,
and
so
go
you're
that
saying
way.
So you're saying knowledge equals, or K equals, justified true belief, and you're saying I can't have knowledge until I actually
there are
act on it.
senses. There are senses in that sense, yes. But
Okay,
there
but
are
that-
other senses
that
of
doesn't
knowledge that don't, in which JTB wouldn't necessarily apply.
That doesn't match the J. Okay, yeah, which is what I'm getting at. JTB doesn't apply to this case, right?
So, what kind of knowledge is it that you're referring to?
Basically a disposition in your brain to act in a certain way when you reach a fork in a road.
I don't really think that I don't understand how that would be knowledge. Or I guess I don't understand in what sort of framework that would be considered knowledge. See, just like you I'm a hard naturalist, but I would take things like various things like epistemology and science and math, as they're all different conventions that we have developed that are abstractions of our mind that are conventional to us. We use them to understand the reality that we live in, science, our experiences of it, things like epistemology, even going into certain areas of science like psychology, philosophy, other things like that. And that the ways in which we would say we come to know things might differ between which convention we're using based on what aspect of our experience or our existence we're trying to define. I don't think it necessarily has to be reduced to specifically scientific methodologies in order to do that. That
Okay.
would be the position that I hold to.
So this is my fork in the road. I have two boards here. So B1 and B2, right? And I want those two boards to stick together for a long period of time. And so I have knowledge about nails and hammers
Mhm.
and wood and I have knowledge about how to hammer and how to hold the nail with my thumbs. I just naturally grab the nail between thumb and forefinger, right? So that's more knowledge. So I have this huge set of knowledge about how these boards go together. How is that any of that justified true belief?
Well, it wouldn't be. That wouldn't be the particular type of knowledge that JTB applies to.
So you can see that I'm trying to widen your idea of what knowledge is. Very wide, wider than.
Oh no, I have a wider. I mean, I understand what knowledge is in other respects, other than just generally propositional knowledge. But I don't think that things within the propositional knowledge framework that we say where we say knowledge is justified true belief can be reduced to scientific methodologies, which is what scientism states, that essentially most aspects of our experience can be defined purely in terms of scientific methodologies or be reduced to them. I don't think that all of them can.
So somewhere up here, Danny mentioned, okay, false knowledge. Okay, so I shouldn't take, okay. Well, we were talking about taking a fork in the road, right? And it could be that either fork works. It doesn't matter which fork you take, right? But now if we're going to believe in something, Danny's applying it to belief in God. He's saying that you can have a belief that's false. And he put false knowledge in parentheses. I'm not sure if he wants to call it knowledge or not. So a JTB would definitely only be, JTB means it's justified and it's true, I believe.
And
So,
you believe it.
and
All
true
three.
belief,
It's
right.
justified and it's true and you believe it.
Yeah, but I'm trying to widen the idea of knowledge, and I'm trying not to draw boundaries around it. So
Well, I mean, there
basically-
is a wider understanding of knowledge. Like in science, knowledge, in scientific methodologies, what one would define as knowledge wouldn't necessarily be justified true belief.
Right. He needs to be asked for an argument for why all justification is in the form of scientific reasoning methodology.
Well, and that's essentially the point that I'm trying to get at is how, because the thing about scientism is the statement we can justify or come to understand or know anything through purely scientific methodologies, or other methods of it will reduce to purely scientific methodologies.
Which is
That's
a straw man version of scientism.
It's not really.
Well,
I mean,
okay.
it's
Are you a
general
scientist? Are you a scientist?
No.
Okay, I am. So
Okay.
you have an opinion about what scientism is, right? But I'm actually
No.
doing it. I'm actually doing it. So wouldn't you think I'd know more about what scientism is than you
Well,
do?
as it applies to you, yes, but I understand the ideology quite well. That's why I'm not a scientismist, I guess, because I
think
understand what it is, and I don't agree with it.
Scientistist, I like that better. That sounds
That does sound better. Yeah.
That sounds tough. I don't know. Anyway,
So,
but I'm
but what I wanted to say is that statement that I made would itself have to be verified through some sort of scientific methodology, and this is where I think that scientism relates to logical positivism. That it's essentially it's self-defeating.
yeah,
The
logical
very axiom that it relies on cannot itself, well, not really axiom, but the very thing that it states that it's trying to do or that it establishes, it can't be established by that.
So you're saying you have to ground your belief in something.
Well, no, in a sense that, like, if you say that the only statements that we can come to know are true are statements that can be empirically verified, well, the statement that I just made can't be empirically verified. So it's self-defeating, which means that, well, that's logical positivism. And what that means is that you can't ever know if that statement actually is true.
I mean, here's the one that really gets a lot of them going, which is, how do you know that scientism is true using scientism?
Yeah, and that's presupposed. That's you sound like Darth Dawkins now.
What?
If you're saying
you sound like Darth Dawkins, you're asking me. You're telling me I gotta. No,
you're
telling me I gotta
hold on.
justify scientism in order to use it.
No, okay, but here's the thing, right?
No. A better way of putting it really quickly is your system needs to be internally consistent in order for it to yield statements about truth or knowledge. And it doesn't do that, is what we're saying.
Okay,
Not
statements
that you
about
have to
truth.
justify the system using the system. It's that the system, before it can be utilized for justification, needs to be internally consistent, and it doesn't appear that it is.
Okay, here's 3 words that are nothing more than a religion. That's all they
Yeah.
are. Truth, certainty, and reality are religions.
I don't know what that
Okay.
means.
Well, the religious beliefs, this thing
I
that we
don't
have
know
to
what
have.
that
No,
means.
no. I mean, so I can agree on the third one, but the other two, absolutely not. Right?
You think reality is a fucking religion, but you don't think certainty and truth are?
I don't know what you mean.
Okay,
when
are you
say
certain of
religion.
anything?
I don't know. I don't know what a person means when they talk about something as being like as being like absolute reality or a true reality or something like that. My understanding of reality is how I perceive it.
You see what you did there? You put absolute, which you borrowed from certainty, and you borrowed from truth, and you said absolute
No,
reality.
right?
This is all just a religious idea.
No,
Can you please explain what you mean when you say religion? I need to understand what context you're using that word. I don't know what you mean.
Okay. What I mean is idiocy.
So
foolishness.
so like what do you mean when you say these words are this? Are you saying that people who use them? I mean, I don't
all of these
know
things
what-
all of these things would have to be grounded with a God, right? In order to have certainty, in order to have a reality with a capital R, where we knew everything about the universe, in order to have something called absolute truth, or for things to divide into true and false, you would have to be a God. So you would have to know the entire universe in your head, right?
Wait, to know what truth is?
To know,
No.
know, yeah, to know
I
what
don't
truth
know.
is with a capital T, which is the way you guys
What
are
is-
using it.
What is
That's
truth?
what you were
No,
driving me down.
Wait, no, what is truth with a capital T? What do you
Okay, I
mean?
wish we could back up and hear what you said about scientism and what you said about logical positivism. You said that I had to have an internally consistent idea of
Yeah, you do.
of science.
Well,
Why?
Yes.
Why?
Because
Why?
if
Because
the
otherwise, if your system can yield results that are not consistent with itself, right? It means that your system can essentially produce contradictions within its own framework, which trivializes all claims that the
made
system
by
you're
the
trying
framework.
to use can produce.
Okay, so I'm having a cup of coffee here. How does internal consistency apply to me drinking this coffee right now?
If the means in which you know that proposition to be true, right? If those propositions cannot be internally justified using using the standard you've set about, right? Then you aren't able to claim actually that the state of affairs is how it is because you can't justify your assumption.
I just had a drink of coffee. I have
How did you use science to understand that it is true that you claiming that claim is true?
what makes you think scientism requires you to use science for everything you do?
Because it says that knowledge about the world that all knowledge about the world is attainable through scientific methodology.
The thing with scientism is it in a lot of ways it does relate to epistemology, because scientism isn't like a framework for how we can understand the world. That would just be science. It is a framework for making statements about the methods that we use to understand how we understand the world. It's a statement about things like knowledge and justification and what they mean, rather than make some framework for how we apply those.
Okay, so scientism uses knowledge of the natural world, okay, to augment and enhance R1, which is your body, your common sense, and basically your expanded version of facts about the universe. Science, okay, is a more rigid study of what we are in the universe. So we use that to determine. I don't need to pull out my science gun when I'm having a cup of coffee, but I'm absolutely certain that I just took a drink of coffee. But
How are
not
you
certain with a capital C, certain as certain as one could possibly be in this reality. So I don't see where you're like, okay. And the other thing about logical positivism and the critique of scientism is that I have to justify scientism with scientism. No, I don't.
Yes, you do.
I just no, I don't. I justify
Yes, you
scientism.
do.
I justify scientism. Will you let me finish?
Sure.
Okay. How do I justify scientism? Okay. Right here. It starts with my body. It goes to what I learned when I was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, and what I've learned since. That's how I justify scientism. Okay. When I took the drink of coffee, I was using skills that I learned when I was 1 month old, 2 months old.
Okay,
My first science experiment was not poking myself in the eye.
Leo, I really do not want to go down this route, but I will if I have to. How do you know your body is real?
It doesn't matter. It is real.
No.
Yeah,
Okay.
Whoa.
Okay.
What
Let me tell you how I know it's real.
establish?
I can tell you how I know it's real.
Okay, but how do you know that it's real?
I know it's real because I know what real means. Real means what I learned right here. This is reality.
How did you know that what you learned is actually just justified and accurate?
Oh, you mean
science, or were there other things?
Oh, you want me to start believing in God and adopt your religion about reality, or do you want me to use everything? Okay, Leo, have you had a drink of anything today?
Yeah, drinking beer right now.
Have you immutable?
Yes.
How many days have you gone in your life without having a drink of anything?
0. I don't think.
Okay, so we all agree on reality. We know what reality is.
What?
This is about how we interpret it, how we come to know, how we can say that we know something or something is justified when we're examining it, looking at it, and describing it.
Is that how you learned how to ride a bike? Is that how you learned to walk? Is that how you learn to take your dick out and pee? Okay, do you know how to pee with your dick?
Yes, I do.
It just kind of happens, but yeah.
Immutable, do you know how to pee with your dick?
I mean, it just kind of happens, but yeah.
Okay.
Danny
So
already
then
made
reality.
a distinction in the chat. Knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge how are not taken to be propositional.
Okay, so now you know.
So there are different forms of knowledge, but they're all within the framework of epistemology. Scientism is essentially a way of taking science and mixing it with epistemology. And I think that they do cross over in the sense that epistemology can inform science, but I don't think that epistemology itself can have a scientific framework. One of the reasons why is because science and the scientific methodologies rely on some of the axioms and the presuppositions made by epistemology, in particular epistemological frameworks. So to then take those same methodologies and put them back into epistemology and try to structure epistemology around them, I think that there's going to be problems.
So interestingly, Corey Nightwolf brings up foundarentism, which is what I adhere to. But Susan Hack, I just listened to a lecture of her talking against scientism, but the scientism she was talking against sounded exactly like the kind of straw man thing that you guys have been presenting me, and
you can
a complete straw man of
you can look
scientism.
this up on any philosophical dictionary or encyclopedia. This is the conventional view that all science is understood through.
You're talking the speed of sound about conventional views?
Okay,
Are you out of your fucking mind?
Then why are you talking about scientism if the view is not itself?
What the fuck is going on here, guys?
Can I share my screen really quick?
Scientist.
Okay, hang on a second. So let's figure out what.
I want to share my screen.
Let's figure out what.
Yeah, can I share my screen really quick before we dive into this?
No, you can't.
Please.
Yes.
Please.
No, you can't. No.
Come on. Seriously.
Nope.
Let me share my screen.
No, we're just going to go down a rabbit hole.
No, we're not.
Going down a rabbit hole.
I'm not going to say anything about it. I just want to show it.
Yeah, see, that's bullshit.
No, it fucking isn't.
That might not be how you take scientism to be, but that's what it is.
For one thing, I would use science to discover what normatism is, right? first.
Oh my
Normative.
fucking
I don't
Oh, I
God.
would.
But
Yep.
see,
And I
science
would
is
use
based
science
on
to discover what morals are.
norms. Science
how
is based
morals
on
work.
norms.
And I would
Science is
use-
based on norms. How do you establish a norm
think
with
that there are
science when it
bots?
uses norms?
Share your
There are
screen again,
bots
Leo.
in science. Oh,
Share your
Oh
screen
my
again,
God.
Leo.
let me
Holy
open the
fuck.
tab again.
I understand why Danny hates you. God Christ.
Well, because you guys don't seem to listen very well.
No,
Okay.
it's just you are. Oh, you are so frivolously attached to
whole
naturalism that it's like a,
Well,
I am
I'm
so-
I'm
I am
very
so
very hard
powerfully.
naturalist myself.
I told you from the beginning. I'm a strict naturalist.
So
Okay.
am I. I am a
Determine
strict
normative and epistemological values. What the fuck is an epistemological value?
Something like justified true belief is an epistemological
Christ.
value
Oh,
utilized in something like, when we're talking about propositional knowledge, that's a value that we utilize. Aspects of doxastic logic contain values that we utilize. Did you want me to stop sharing, or did you want me to keep sharing?
No, I didn't really.
this is why I adhere to dualism.
Wait, you didn't want me to stop sharing?
I didn't want you to stop sharing. As long as you put
Okay,
that fucking
sorry.
piece of shit up there, we may as well look at it, right?
Well, I
You see
mean,
You see what the last
want-
line said?
do you want to? Okay.
Okay. Gotta add it to the stream. The last line said, the term scientism is generally used critically, implying unwarranted application of science in situations considered not amenable to the application of scientific method or similar scientific standards.
Yeah.
Which I would say, if you try to ride a bike and you bring out your science tools to ride a bike, then you're going to fall on your fucking ass, because nobody does that. And no good scientist is going to claim that you should learn how to ride a bike with science. But I will tell you that in principle, I could take an organism riding a bike, I could take that patch of the world, and I could tell you every goddamn thing about what's happening in that organism, in that organism's brain, and in that bike, and I could apply science to every bit of that, and I could probably end up telling you how to ride a bike better.
Before Leo goes on to address that, I'm going to address something worth substance here. And Korag says coherentism essentially is justifying something as true as or likely true through circular reasoning, though through that circular reasoning can be justified by demonstrating its usefulness within your system. Not necessarily.
That would be pragmatism. Foundherentism is a little different than that. Foundherentism is more like a mosaic.
What I would say coherentism is coherentism is a system of knowledge which describes knowledge as one concept being coherent to its parts and also coherent within like the framework of how we build arguments and logic itself. Right? I mean, I think that's a precondition for things to be knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I agree with that, but I would be more of a foundherentist.
Okay, circular reasoning.
I don't adhere to it currently just because I don't understand much about it. So,
circular reasoning is when you take one proposition, P1, and you derive P2, and then you derive P3, and then you go around and rederive P1. Okay, that's not what foundherentism.
Yes, found and then herentism.
Foundherentism, right? That's not what it is. Foundherentism is a massive network of interconnected things that basically are exactly like what I was telling you about. The knowledge that you build from the time you're born until the time you're 3 years old. You start creating this network of knowledge. That is reality. So that's what reality is.
What you would call knowledge, I'd be more akin to call a belief.
A belief is almost a little bit richer than what I'm talking about here, with knowledge how, and your body knowledge and your emotional knowledge and your moral knowledge and all of that. A belief would be more about something that, you see, we can apply language. So we can take language and we can tease these things out. And when we do that, we can end up with these particles or sentences, right? So we take language and we create these sentences about something, but those sentences are a reduction of the reality, right? So this is the reality. So we create this sentence. But what I'm saying with, well, maybe we oughtn't to leave that. So a belief is almost, well, I think we operate on a lot of beliefs that we do not ever put into language. But I think we could almost put all of our beliefs into language, right? I believe I live by the river, that sort of thing. Though I probably, okay, I believe that I live by that first oak tree in my neighbor's yard. I never thought that belief before. So I never brought it into a language proposition. But when I come up against it, I believe it. So now have I just formed a belief, or did I always have a belief?
I mean, to me, what a belief is it's expressing an attitude towards a proposition.
Danny,
Right.
It's not rambling as bad as you fucking ramble.
It's worse. It's way fucking worse.
What's your complaint?
The system is entirely butchered. It's beyond salvage.
Okay, what are you?
Me?
Yeah.
That's a kind of vague question. You want to clarify?
What do you think you are? What do you think you are in the world?
A biological organism whose primary function is to reproduce and survive.
What do you mean? Whoa! I understand organism, but I don't know about primary function to reproduce. Nobody wants you to fucking reproduce, immutable. Trust me.
Oh, well. Okay. Hey, I'm surprised you reproduced. If that's any.
Okay. Yeah, but it ends there. These guys are never gonna get around to grandkids, so don't worry about it. But I am hoping for a perfect clone of myself. So anyway,
even if you had a perfect clone, it still wouldn't be you. But
yeah, I would have to go through the same experiences. But yeah, but that's okay. I want some new experience. I want a new adventure anyway. But anyway, okay. So you're an organism. So you know you're an organism. So all things flow from that. So that's the base of your knowledge. And not only that, but you're an organism out here some 25 years hence, right? Around there, approximately 25 years hence. So you're this organism has built up this body of knowledge, right? This found herentist knowledge, this collection of knowledge, okay? What is wrong with that knowledge if you never justify it or make it internally consistent? What if you just use that knowledge?
This might push the conversation a few stages back. What do you qualify as knowledge? Like, when you say, like, I know something, what is that? Untangle that web. Like, what is that expressing?
This thing has a brain. Okay, it's a brain, right? So knowledge is basically a disposition. Okay, well, a disposition of your body and brain. I hate to divide them. To act in a certain way, that's knowledge.
Okay, but if I say I know that the sky is blue, does the sky have some disposition towards blueness or towards being?
No, your brain does. Your brain has a disposition. Your brain has a disposition to utter the word blue.
That's a statement about. That's a statement only about like a property of the world, which is not the brain, being the sky. The only way that one works is if you go through with if you think your brain in the vat.
Okay. If you look at the sky and somebody asks you what color the sky is, your knowledge of the sky being blue is the disposition for you to utter the phrase or make the noise, the squeaky noise blue, right? So you make a squeaky noise blue. That's what it means. Okay.
Well, but
there's more to it than that. Now, if you look at the sky as an organism, your body and brain are going to respond in a way that basically triggers all sorts of blue connected knowledge. And you are going to feel that you're looking at the sky and it is blue. Okay. We don't need to get down to the language to make it so. You
Okay,
have a knowledge of blue that only you as a human being, as your particular human being, could have by looking at blue skies.
Okay, but here's the thing, right? If you apply that to things which you claim to have knowledge of, eventually the system becomes self-referential, and it becomes a system which is circular ultimately.
Okay, it is. Yes, I told you it's circular. But a better way to describe it is not as a circle, but describe it as a tapestry. Okay, because
Okay,
there is no simple circle.
It doesn't matter if the circle has like several dots and a smiley. I mean, the thing is, it's bad for it to be a circular argument because it's assuming its own truth to get anywhere.
You said it's bad to be a circular argument?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have this bit of knowledge right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what supports it is another bit of knowledge right here, right?
Right.
Okay. And what supports that is a bit of knowledge right here. And what supports that is a bit of knowledge right here, right? That's a circular argument. Okay.
Right, but eventually what happens, though, right, is that one of those other bits of knowledge somewhere down the line is going to refer back to the previous bit of knowledge that was the original target of asking, like, what you know to be the case. Right? So essentially, it spirals back to this kind of all claims you make about knowledge when it's in reference towards a brain state and about disposition. Eventually, it cycles back into this general kind of self-referential framework. And
Do you have any doubt? Do you have any doubt that you're an organism?
No, I don't. But I don't think the way I understand that,
Leo,
by appealing to a normative brain state about whether or not I'm predisposed to believe that I am an organism or am not an organism.
Okay, can you unpack that for me, please?
Sure. I mean, I think the way I understand an organism is by first defining the qualities of that proposition, and then seeing ways in which me as an object, right, in what ways I do or do not cohere into that categorical description of a human or a biological organism.
When did you figure that out?
I figured that out when I was able to contrast the set of the object or the collective that is me to a type of propositional state.
Yeah, but when did you do that? When did you first do that? How old? Could you give me a date and a time?
When did I first do that? I don't think I need to actively recall when I do that. I think it's a mental process that we naturally utilize. I think the process of comparing objects internally to some other standard is one of the ways in which we understand to understand a relative frame of knowledge towards a thing. It looks like Leo wants to get something out.
He wants it. Yeah, Leo, you want to get something out?
No, I'm just listening.
Okay. So you think there was a time in your life where you sat there and what was the process you went through? How did you justify your comparing yourself to organisms, and how did you work that out?
So I justify it by comparing the qualities that I have as an individual to the properties that an organism has, and seeing if the two are coherent with each other.
So you think maybe it was like on August 16th on
I think
1998?
I think it's a process that kind of runs in the software of the brain. I don't think it's a process I have to actively trigger for it to occur.
Do you think that happened at a moment in time?
I think it happened at a moment in time, and I think it continuously happens.
But you think it just happened once at a moment in time, then you realized you were an organism, and from then on for the rest of your life, you know you're an organism.
I think at some point in time, formally, I recognize and begin to categorize myself as an organism. And that belief is substantiated through time by, repeated evaluation of that claim and also a broadening, a broadening of a broadened understanding of those terms and the connections that exist between those terms.
But prior to this, you didn't know at all. So you had no knowledge over here at this time.
I knew you.
There was a moment when you decided that you were an organism.
The knowledge to a coherentist is between the coherency of the two concepts. I can still I can still have knowledge and not know it, because the way in which the concepts are defined just requires that the properties of one are coherent with the properties of another. It doesn't matter necessarily if I understand, or if I'm able to identify at age 1.5 what those properties are, and if there is in fact a proper relation that subsumes them.
Okay, do you understand how my line of question? You must understand what point I'm getting at, right? Like, when did you decide that you had a foot? That I have a foot? Like,
since I was born, that's innate knowledge.
You knew when you were born that you had a foot?
I know you knew after some point in time, like a year, 6 months. I don't know.
You pretty much figure out your foot, I think, as soon as somebody steps on it. But anyway, you understand that knowledge, is sort of like a cone, right? It sort of grows out from when you're conceived, right? And you leave the womb. There's a lot of stuff that actually we probably figure out about our bodies in the womb, but it's out here where we figure out how not to poke ourselves in the eye. And then out here, when we start to learn language, we start to create propositions. That's why I was pushing back against propositions, because there's a whole body of knowledge that's non-propositional out here, and we share that with any animal, right? So
sure, I mean, I'm willing to accept that there's bodies of knowledge which are non-propositional in nature, which are declarative and normative as sets of their own, right? I think the majority of knowledge that we encounter, the majority of knowledge that we tend to want to acquire or to be familiar with, is knowledge that does concern propositions about the world.
You think that's bigger, the propositional knowledge, than your body knowledge?
Sure, because there's a set of things. There's a set of things that exist, right? And that's fine. People can agree or quibble about what those things are, but more fundamentally, there's processes, and that's what science discovers: the processes that exist among various objects and abstracts within the world. And that process, though, those processes, span a much larger space than the objects themselves. And those relations have to be defined in terms of propositions, typically.
Okay, so you think propositional knowledge is bigger than body knowledge?
I think so.
Okay. So you know more propositions than you have neurons.
I think the set of knowledge that regards propositions is bigger than the set of knowledge which is described when you're talking about bodily knowledge or knowledge that is innate to a person.
Okay, what's your metric for that?
Again, coherentism.
No, your metric. How are you saying one is greater than another? You're saying you're actually okay. You're going this way, right?
There are a finite number of things in which I can know about my body, right? The position of joints, the position of some limb, the relative state, emotional state I have, appetite, anger level, whether or not I want to cuddle with somebody or whatever the case may be, right? There, you can draw up a finite list after enough digging in regards to propositions concerning bodily or innate knowledge. But that's not the case when you consider the set of all abstract objects that exist, which includes bodies and processes and relations that underlie rather those objects.
So you know all abstract objects that exist?
I don't need to know all abstract objects that exist.
Okay.
What I need
But
to understand is that there do exist a set of objects which are abstract in nature, but that within that set of abstract objects, one such category you can build is bodily or body knowledge, right? A notion of a body.
okay. So there is right here in the back of your brain something called the cerebellum. Okay. There's 30 million neurons. Okay. It's a tensor calculus calculator, basically, that's interconnected with all your cortex. Okay. In order for you to move, you probably use about 10 million of those neurons in order to move. And you're saying your propositional knowledge is greater than that bodily knowledge.
Yeah.
If I throw a ball, I throw a ball to you.
What do we mean? What do we mean when we say greater?
Yeah, that's what we kind of need a metric, don't we? So, kind of drew the cerebellum badly.
So, what would that metric be?
Number of bits, maybe number of items.
I don't know what it means to refer to propositions as being a number of bits.
Well, if I tell you that I'm going to the store, okay.
Yeah.
So we have a G. So G and then me X. Okay. So G stands for going to the store. So X is going to the store. I'm going to the store. Or M. Call me Mike. Okay, I'm going to the store. That's pretty small compared to this fucking shit.
Oh, okay, but here's the thing, right? When you're referring to like the cerebellum and the complex computations it performs, we're not just referring to that particular that particular object, right? We're referring to kind of a descriptive form of that object. Like when I refer to a ball, right? I'm not necessarily thinking about a type of mathematical object where x squared plus y squared plus z squared equals 1. Or, or x squared plus y squared plus z squared equals r squared or something like that, right? I tend to associate properties with that object. I tend to associate a ball having some descriptive properties to it, as being round, as being uniform in distribution, or in shape and things like that, right? So there is a way in which you can say, okay, there's 30 some odd million computations occurring in the brain, fine, but we're not just referring to the ability or the object itself as it would be named. We're referring more so to the type of thing conveyed by that object.
Okay.
Like when you say like a pie, for instance, right? Nobody thinks, or nobody would describe a pie as just being the word PIE, right? What you're thinking of probably is a circular or semicircular, object in a pan that has a graham cracker crust and a filling.
There are square pies.
There are square pies. I mean, typically you
I
would
saw
think
one
of
triangular shaped pie once.
Usually you think of a pie as a circle, but sometimes there are different shapes.
Yeah, so we have a family resemblance here, right? So anyway,
so I had a question. Are you saying that when you're whatever part of the brain it was that you drew is doing this thing, are you saying that part of the brain knows that it's doing this thing or has some knowledge how?
Yeah, that's how it happens.
That makes no sense to me. That's like saying that the Earth has knowledge how it orbits.
Yeah, that's
what I would say is that in such a situation, that's just not knowledge. That thing doesn't hold knowledge. That knowledge is something that exists within agents.
And that's a very important point, Leo, because the knowledge your body has is knowledge. Your cerebellum,
obviously, but I don't know.
Now it says an error occurred. Please try. This happened to Vosh when he went. No, well, I don't know if YouTube went down, but I know Vosh had the same exact issue. when he went live a couple hours ago.
Wow.
It dropped him.
I mean, the shit just done. Oh, let's see.
So you can't even load the stream at all.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
An
it's-
error occurred.
I wonder if it's gone. So I wonder what the error is. Playback ID or whatever. Anyway, so hopefully you understand that this last part, but we don't want to talk about it unless we're recording. So, because otherwise we'll get confused in the future.
I mean, I think the important thing to kind of like convey on my part is that I don't see there being a problem as kind of trying to define knowledge in the scientific way. That's a noble endeavor. Although the fundamental issue is when you try to apply consistency to that standard, which is
Hold on a second,
something
Amiro.
to-
Just hold on. Oh, what the fuck? So my site is muted.
Yeah. Skyworks 600 just said we're back up.
Yeah, I think we're live again. So what the hell? I have no idea. That's weird.
That's really weird.
It just temporarily booted us out.
YouTube.
Let me see if I can live draw something. Should pop up in a minute. Oh, it's not running.
Trace, an error occurred. What a great summary of their discussion.
yeah, exactly. It's fucking helpful. It's like
But I did want to say that you had said that or something about defining knowledge in scientific, according to scientific methodologies. I just don't think that works because I think we define scientific methodologies based on other external forms of what or definitions of what knowledge is.
I
Ideas
don't have a problem with that circularity at all. I don't have a problem with that because it's not circularity; it's a network. If it were purely circle, I'd have a problem with it. But we're not dealing with logical propositions here. We're dealing with science about what we are. What are we?
but science is based on propositions. Science is a normative endeavor.
Oh,
So-
Jesus.
And I don't think that norms can be established using science. I think that science is established using norms.
Well, what do you call a norm? What's a norm?
A norm is some standard for evaluation or judgment
Of what?
of anything, ethics, science, anything.
Okay,
Running
so-
a race, running a race. There's normative aspects to it, like running fast or winning. If you want to win, you ought run fast.
So if I want to teach you something, I ought to do X. Okay, to teach you something, I ought to do X. So I ought to do X, right? Okay, if I want to teach you something. Okay, I'm saying that this is the way to know science, how to teach you something. That's what.
Yeah, but
what
ought one do? What ought one do to do science, to utilize scientific methodologies that are going to yield accurate results? And what ought one do to understand that those results are valid?
Well, those are scientific questions.
True. I don't really think so.
I think they are.
I
Okay,
don't.
what ought one do?
Well,
What
we ought make observations, right?
Okay, we ought make observations.
We
Okay,
ought-
we know that pretty much from the body knowledge, right?
Yeah,
The core.
We ought develop
Common sense.
hypotheses that attempt to explain those observations. We ought test those hypotheses in the real world or through laboratory experiments or some form of experimentation to see if they comport with reality. We ought define what we mean when we say comport. We ought then develop them into theories and utilize them to further explain aspects of our reality. And we ought adjust them to become more accurate and explanative over time. But I don't think that science itself was established any of those oughts.
Okay, so how did you come up with the ought observe, the first thing?
We decided that that's something that we should do if we want to come to understand the fundamental mechanistic nature of reality.
What do we base that on?
It's normative. It's based on reasons.
What are the reasons?
The reasons are that it helps us in understanding what we think reality is doing.
How do we know it does?
Because it works.
That's axiomatic. It's a
How much of that do you think you
not-
knew
not
when you were? How much of that do you think you knew when you were 7 years old?
Why does it matter if you knew it
know.
when you're 7 years old?
Because that's what you because you were once 7 years old. So
Sure.
why would you where you came from, right? You see, this is a common philosophers will start arguing about certain